Hi, Leah.
Hi. We're back.
We're back. What's the name of our podcast?
Oh my God, let's see if I can remember. The name of our podcast is The Anatomy of Ancestral Alchemy.
Yes, so here we are. Do you want to start us off from like where we finished from, and then we can fill folks in on where we're going next?
Sure. Yeah, so our pilot episode, if you all caught that, was about one of my ancestors and working in an alchemical process to support some healing for my ancestral lineage on my mom's side and for me and future generations to come. Talked about how that was a snapshot of the small scenario of a bigger situation that's unfolding politically. And so here we are. And it sounds like our hearts want to speak to more around the current times and how we're seeing that dynamic show up on the political stage and life in general. Yeah.
And a phrase I use in my groups and with clients is like zooming in and then zooming out. And we're going to go back and forth because what is happening in the larger global environment currently is an echo from past generations. Kind of cue us on where we are in our analysis or our exploration. And when we do that, I am inviting you to feel what that feels like in your body, because based on your own ancestry, different parts of what we talk about are going to resonate differently. That people are unpacking these huge ancestral burdens that are so overwhelming and they're not able to clear it on their own.
Yeah.
And the reason why they're not able to clear it on their own is because it's collective trauma. So it happened to a group of people. And so to try to discharge it individually won't work because you need a bigger nervous system capacity. And so what's nice about this space, hopefully, is that as Leah and I talk, we're like using our nervous systems collectively to land certain charges. So it's also, as you're listening to the podcast, use it as a window in to understand where your ancestral alchemy is coming in and how to land some of that charge so you're not holding it in your body. Because historically, we've been, this is my story, taught, programmed to use our body as resources to extract from, rather than seeing our bodies as human bodies that are here not just to produce, but to live.
Yeah.
And so unpacking this is one of the ways to get back to that humanity. How does that land for you?
Yeah. It lands. It definitely lands. It lands. It actually, I feel centered after hearing you say that. Yeah, I feel like there's a grounding and understanding that this isn't mine to carry alone.
Yeah. So just for a second, what does grounding feel like for you, Leah? Just for folks who have never felt embodied before.
Yeah, so when I'm not grounded, I feel like a bubbling up in my core, almost like an effervescence that's almost trying to take me out of my body. It doesn't always, but it feels that way. And when I feel grounded, the energy is actually going down. Yeah, it's going down and it feels very smooth. It almost feels like honey, right? It's like that energy of just like slow, thick, sweet honey moving down my core and dropping into the earth. So activation for me often feels up and out, and groundedness or centering feels very down and in.
And then my nervous system goes, oh. Like, oh, that's yummy. And so that's the sensation, is like it goes, oh, yeah. Versus if someone's saying something about me that doesn't land, it's like this, like very confusing, and I feel a little crazy. So, yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
So, what's the topic we're going to talk about today?
How does this topic feel for you?
It's okay.
Can we go there?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
I have an interesting backstory to connect
Please.
to why this is feeling so.
Oh, I have a
poignant
backstory
for me.
too. Go ahead.
Do you want to share yours first?
No.
Okay. So I grew up in the mountains of West Virginia in the heart of Appalachia. And one of the things I think a lot of people do not know about West Virginia is that at one point it was completely logged. There is no virgin timber, no virgin forests in West Virginia. And this is because when we were using huge ships to transport goods a lot, and they needed the huge ship masts, they needed trees. And so the more like folk telling story of that from where I'm from is that very rich, wealthy people came in from the city. New York is often named, and they asked people that live there to give up their timber rights. And people said no, and they fought back, and people kept pushing and kept negotiating and kept trying to demand certain things. And a lot of people ended up agreeing because they felt so much pressure and also felt like it was a way that they could survive. Okay, if I give away timber rights, then these rich, wealthy men are going to give me money, and this is how I sustain my family. And we see this replicated, but it starts to move into why our topic today and why it was sitting on my heart is the presidential meeting with Trump, Vance, and Zelensky that we have now seen televised. Because it has to do with mineral rights. And what that has created, I think partially, there's more to it as well, but part of what that's created, I think, for a lot of Native West Virginians, and I want to be really clear when I say that, what I mean when I say that is mostly white people that have been there for generations. Mom's side of the family has lived in West Virginia for 8 generations. It's created a really insular community that doesn't trust people coming in from the outside at all. They'll negotiate bad deals that actually don't help survival.
Like they have a hidden agenda.
Exactly. And it's created like significant self-reliance. Like mountain people are like renowned for being resilient in the face of like environmental adversity, because it's already such a rural community. And yeah, I'll leave it there. But there are a lot of threads that I see woven into the negotiation that Trump and Vance were trying to ask Zelensky to agree to. Yeah.
So interesting. I'm still digesting the piece around there is no virgin timber.
No, it was completely logged.
So I'm still trying to land this.
But over time, yes, all trees.
When I imagine using my brain and then feeling into my body, if every single tree was taken, yes, over time, but every single tree was taken. I just think of the Lorax
connection. Yes, thank you. And I think to be really clear, part of why there's no virgin timber is for other reasons as well, right? Logging period. But a lot of it back in the 1800s was because of these ships and these manipulative deals, essentially. Yeah.
And the other piece that I'm landing with is, so going on to land and identifying something that I want from it and extracting.
Yep.
And it's interesting that so trauma decontextualized in a person looks like personality. So I'm not going to trust people from the outside coming in. Trauma decontextualized in a family looks like family traits. So I'm not going to ask for help to support if we're struggling financially, that would have been like the anti-dependence, right? So trauma decontextualized in a group of people looks like culture. So you're saying folks who grew up in that area were very insular and did not trust the outside. Yes.
And a lot of people, a lot of reasons for this too, but many people never leave. And many people never move there or have a hard time assimilating to that area.
Because it would be hard to live there.
Because it's hard to make connection and form community. Yeah.
Interesting.
And there are pockets that are different than others, of course.
So now the next piece I'm digesting, what it means in my body is how I'm doing this. If the relationship with the land and the people that are on it are extractive, then people are bracing for who's coming in, which is limbic system living, like
Yep.
survival, protective, like keeping people out, which is one of the collective traumas, which is not being connected in community or resourcing each other. How does that land when I say it like that, Leah?
Yeah, it definitely lands. I think what's a little trickier about West Virginia is how rural it is. So even having connection and community might be people going to church once a week, right? Even if we're thinking about the 1800s before cars, right? Like it took a lot of energy actually to gather if you lived miles away from each other, but there was still community, right? But it also speaks to the piece around why it was so important to be self-sufficient. If it took you hours to go borrow a cup of sugar, you either just went without the sugar or you made sure in some way that you were really planned that, the things were planned out.
Okay. And so I'm always placing timeline wise, right? Leah, you said your family originated there 8 generations, your mom. So what I understand about the colonization of Turtle Island, the US, is that it started with some folks from England to start to make their way and take over land and make really hard decisions around the people who lived here. And then chattel slavery also worked the land, again, extractive. And then when that ended, it was like a necessary immigration of bringing people in to continue to work the land and produce things. How does that land with how your mom's family line ended up there? Do you know?
I think what's interesting about my mom is actually, and my dad, even though he's not native to West Virginia, is that they both worked in environmental justice and protection. And then also, right, it was their way of channeling that energy, especially my mom. And she grew up really loving and learning not to extract.
Just got chills. I'm still chilling.
I think as far back as I know my family to go, which is like great-great-grandfather on my mom's side, were all super nature lovers and always wanting to really be thoughtful about how they were engaging with land and animals and stuff. And my mom literally worked in land conservation. That was her work for most of her life.
So I feel called to just make it explicit, this connection to that is literally ancestral alchemy. Right? When we have echoes of something that needs to be resolved for our ancestry, right? That we're pulled almost like whether it's a calling or a work or a hyperfixation or focus, that if we look at it as a breadcrumb, we can usually land it somewhere in our history. Which actually for me, when I'm able to do it, gives me a sense of mooring. Like, oh, this is the social justice piece because this happened to my people. And that's why I'm doing this. And it bringing it into the conscious also provides a sense of choice.
Yeah, that's right. It's true.
Because when I wasn't aware of the connection to my ancestry, I just kept burning myself out. Because it felt like this thing I was trying to fix or repair when it's actually, it didn't originate with me in my body.
What it does is it adds context.
Yes.
Yeah. Understandable context.
Right. So the quote that we were using at the start of this was Resmaa Menakem's trauma decontextualized looks like personality. So the ancestral alchemy and the anatomy of it is how do we bring in the context? So now we're in this context of the global history, right? We're in the context of where all these traumas or disconnection from our humanity comes from.
Absolutely.
And how do we repair that humanity?
Yeah.
Because that's also the solution for saving the planet.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And just to bring this back to the political context that we're seeing now is when my heart got that ancestral ping was around, you need to give us 50% of your mineral rights for us to continue to support you financially.
Yes.
And what does that do? That gives me more power. That actually gives me more power, meaning Trump and Vance and our government. And even the body language, words that were used, so much of it was felt like a modern day replication to me.
Can you say more?
Like even them, when I think about, there are a lot of stereotypes about Appalachia, especially mountain people, right? There are a lot of stereotypes around gaps in teeth, actually. There's stereotypes about clothes they wear, stereotypes about the hillbillies, right? And one of the things that happened when Zelensky showed up was, oh, you couldn't even wear a suit? Literally, they called him out for not wearing a suit.
White supremacy.
What the actual fuck? Dude is protecting his country from war and can still show up in person. Why does he need to wear a fucking suit? This is where I'm not grounded right now, right? That alone made me so livid. Yeah.
So interesting. Now I'm trying to place, Trump had written a book on the art of negotiation. And so I haven't read it, but I'm just landing in the boardroom of when you're trying to negotiate, some of the tactics in business is destabilizing the other person.
Totally.
Yes.
You look this way, you are not worthy. Immediately. Destabilizing. Yep. Yeah, so that really stood out to me.
So here's the funny thing.
Yeah.
I haven't even watched it.
Wow.
I can't.
I will be so curious.
I can't do it.
That is the way that I will describe what I witnessed. So that happened. At one point, I'm going to give you because you were dipping into the family context, I'm going to give you the family that I saw in the three of them. I saw Trump as a preteen bully, literally in language and behavior. I saw Zelensky as a mature grown man trying to regulate himself through that entire meeting. And I saw Vance as someone that was playing the field and trying to scope out where any little sense of how he could help them form a connection while still not erring on the side of you're being harmed right now and I should align with you. It was very much middle kid.
Interesting.
Middle kid or the friend in school that's the friend with the bully and the one being picked on, like that kind of a dynamic.
I see. Timeliness feels accurate.
That was like the family dynamic that I saw in that room. And then a ton of witnesses that didn't have a voice, like all the reporters, maybe eventually some of them did when the story was coming out, but if we see it as like trauma happening. So
thank you for that.
Yeah,
are you okay?
Yeah, it's good for me to talk about because I'm like, these are all the connections that I just see and feel alone. And so the piece that I was going to bring in that didn't really feel, but now feels like it since you're bringing in the family, like the context is when I heard about it, I didn't have to watch it. I felt it in my body and it reminded me of when I had started deciding not to bring my kids home. In my family of origin in Colorado. And when I share this piece, it's not to demean anyone in my family. It just gives context to how I experienced this talk between 45 and Zelensky. I had brought my 4-year-old who is just turning 4 and my 2-year-old to my home where I grew up, where my mom, my brother, and his 2 kids lived, and his kids are significantly older. So I think the oldest was maybe 12 and the younger one was 10. So my oldest is turning 4. Yeah. And there was an interaction where my 4-year-old wanted to play on the piano and my 12-year-old nephew needed to practice was the instruction from his grandmother, my mother. And so he went to the piano and started practicing, but my 4-year-old was like, no, I want to play. And so what happened in the very short amount of time was he allowed the kind of cover on the piano to slowly just push on her hands, right? He just did that. And I witnessed it. And I'm a parent of little kids. And I'm like, no big deal, right?
And so I was trying to have a conversation to center both experiences of the kids, right? Instead of that, my family went into basically how I grew up, which was, how dare you? You're not behaving the way that you're supposed to. This is to the 12-year-old, right? And he was like feeling misunderstood, and so was really angry because he's a tween, right? Appropriately. And it escalated to a point of threatening someone's place. So I'm holding my kids, trying to intervene and center the needs of the kids. So the least protected, the most vulnerable, right? While these kids in grown-up bodies are fighting over who has the most power and respect, right? And what happened was this realization of, this is not a place where I can build connection safely. So zooming out of my story, right, about boundaries, back into what happened between 45 and Zelensky, is 45 and Vance. I keep saying 40. That's my
Yeah.
Don't want to say his name. They didn't center the most vulnerable.
That's right.
They still don't see the vulnerable as worthy of protecting. They're not even on the table of negotiation. These people, the Ukrainians, are not even at the fucking table.
Nope.
All they see is money. All they see is ego. All they see is power. And like so many chills, is making the very hard decision of, I am going to make a mature decision and withdraw the connection between my kids and their grandmother and uncle to protect them.
Yeah, that's right.
And so Zelensky had to decide, I am going to not negotiate the minerals, and I'm going to risk the rooting, the mooring, the safety of these people, because it's more important to center their humanity than it is to center their survival.
Yeah, I think that's so beautifully put. And in watching this, part of what kept just infuriating me was, and this speaks to your destabilization comment earlier, is Trump said at one point, maybe repeatedly, he said, why wouldn't you just save more lives? This is easy. You can easily save more lives by saying yes. Just save your people. Why won't you save your people?
Yeah.
Like literally those are the words coming out of his mouth towards someone that has been given an incredibly difficult job and is having to make a brutal decision.
Right.
Because there's no doubt in my mind that Zelensky's been debating this, because he could save more lives immediately if he were to agree to this deal. But does it long-term sustain the livelihood and humanity of the Ukrainian people, especially if 50% of their mineral rights are taken away? No.
And who knows, right? The US historically has not followed through on any. So if you give up this, there's no saying that he's going to come back and ask for something else. Historically, nothing has been followed.
Which is also why the people of West Virginia were so defeated and disheartened, because they did not receive what they thought they were getting in return for the timber rights.
So this betrayal of people, right? So the role of government is parent. That the agreement, the contracted agreement, the government of the country that you are in, their job is to center your needs and take care of you. And so the betrayal from that kind of parent figure is so huge. And
Absolutely.
And so I'm now zooming back into my experience of the betrayal that I felt even when I was a child,
Yep.
and then blame me for having the feelings that would come up very normally. Yeah, so I just see the layers of the indigenous people were lied to, zooming back in, and they just continue to perpetuate these lies just to get the bottom line.
Yes, that's right.
The deal, the business deal, how to seal the deal.
Yeah, and at one point, speaking of sealing the deal, Trump said, it's going to be so hard to do business when people act like this.
Oh my God. This is why I can't see it. I would destroy my TV.
I get it. I get it. It's going to be so hard to do business when people act like this. He also reached over at one point and got in his physical space. And I mean, it was like, listen, you've talked a lot already. We could unpack this in a whole series of podcasts. I'm curious, what happened in your body when I did this? If you just feel into the energy of that dynamic.
It triggers me into when I would be in spaces where people historically have been resourced financially, and this feeling of that I'm doing something wrong, and it activates my sense of incompetence that I don't understand what I'm supposed to be doing, and I'm doing something wrong, and I fucked it up for everybody.
Yeah.
It's like patronizing is the right word.
Yeah.
Condescending, patronizing. Yeah.
Yeah. It was so fucked up. Yeah.
So now I just want to zoom out for a second. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So one of the ways I work now, and it has just provided so much more relief on my body, Leah, is I view everything as a breadcrumb, right? Nothing wrong with me, nothing wrong with Trump. What is the data telling me? Okay. So the data is telling me, I zoom way out. The start of the US was a business transaction, right? So one of the books that I was researching, The Real History of Pocahontas, which was written from the oral history of an indigenous group, they talked about venture capitalists from England. Venture capitalists from England funded these ships to go to the US, Turtle Island, what was going to become the United States of America, to figure out how to increase their income. So one of the tasks was for this person to go and figure out how to cure tobacco because the Spaniards had the market down.
Yeah.
And so they went and tried to pressure the indigenous shamans, who were the ones who held that information because it was like so precious, right? How to get them to give over that information so that they could start competing with the Spaniards for income. And so when we look at how does something start, right? Because everything has an energetic imprint, right? So if Turtle Island started from the inception of colonialism as a business opportunity, now we have the full context. Yeah. Whereas hold on, let me just land this. I have so much grief coming in. This connects to Salem, right? We were feeling into Salem, and it was like so many, they were just lied to. They didn't realize that they were here for a business transaction. They thought they were here for a literal better life. So they were used, their bodies were used. Not only were their bodies were used to do great harm that they didn't consent to, but needed to survive. Absolutely. Yes. What's happening in your body, Leah? Because
so much grief too.
Yeah, where do you feel it?
It's so sad. I feel it in my chest and my heart, like around my heart, just like a drop, like, it almost makes me want to vomit. It's like that disgust.
It is disgusting. Yeah. Okay. The piece of information that was really medicinal for me to understand was that this was an impossible decision. Yeah. It was either allow my family to starve or do the unthinkable, which was to murder and to steal in order to survive.
Hearing you repeat that, and as a reminder for myself, what often happens is this piece around judgment. And
Yes.
I'm going to share a really vulnerable, quick story here. So in 2017, I witnessed the mass shooting in Vegas. And at one point in my journey of navigating that with two other friends, we had locked ourselves in a hotel bathroom in an industrial kitchen of a hotel because there were no windows, so nobody could see us, and it was out of earshot. There was a random woman in there with us who we had found on the stairwell who was freaking out, and we decided she needed to come with us to be in community for safety. And while we were in that bathroom, her anxiety was so intense that she was talking loudly. And there was an automatic toilet, so anytime you'd walk in front of it, it would flush. And that was a situation in which I quickly learned how much and how quickly we can think to harming somebody if we are going to be harmed. And if the people that we have the closest connections with, these are two friends that I grew up with, didn't know this person. I had just enough space. I think all three of us did, actually. We processed this afterwards. We had just enough space to understand where things were coming from for her, and just enough space of safety to not intervene in a harmful way. But all three of us had to say something to her. Listen, you're putting all of us in jeopardy. Please take a deep breath, sit down, quiet yourself. But it was a moment for all three of us of like how quickly we can make a decision like that.
Yeah. What's happening in
to
your body
save each other. What's happening in my body, what's interesting is I actually feel pretty steady. As like big as my energy feels, I feel pretty solid. Thankfully, I've done a lot of work around this. But it's not something that I share a lot because I don't know that the world is always ready for it.
Ready for these stories, the truth of it.
Yeah.
Yes.
In national tragedies, like the one that I was a part of, right? Like the other political stories we're talking about here. And I think the sadness, like the grief that comes up as I say that piece is like, these are stories we don't hear that happen every day. Mine was just a random,
I
think it was a Thursday in 2017. And there was a moment of, I may have to make this decision to make this person be quiet, and that might be harmful. I don't know what that's going to look like. Yeah.
How does it feel to share what's happening in your body?
It feels good to share because it's my truth, right? Like it's my truth. It is my lived experience. You know? Thankfully, none of us had to make that decision. It was also interesting to me that all three of us were thinking about it in some way.
Yeah.
Like I was not alone in that.
This survival.
Yeah, our instincts kick in strongly. And so I think what that's bringing up in context of the Trump piece that you just mentioned around he has his own wounding, essentially, right? So what I was hearing you say in that, hard as it is for us to believe this, is I could have been him.
Yes.
You could have been him.
Yes.
All of you watching could have been him. All of us. I know it's really hard to understand that, but this is the thing about shadow work I feel is so important to how we are thinking about our lived experience and lives right now. The more that we can see these aspects of ourselves, the more that we can honor even the glimmer of humanity in somebody that's causing a ton of harm.
Yeah.
There is no doubt Trump is causing fucking chaotic harm in ways I've never seen in my lifetime, in ways my parents have never even seen in their lifetime. And yet, when you zoom out, to use your words, like you can see the wounding, right? Like I can see the wounding, and to know that I could have at any point become him. So I get really curious about what makes us not become like him, right? And that's part of where I feel like our trajectory might be headed with our work too.
I have a a story. I think what makes us not, so this is a story, I don't know, is that I feel connected to other people. When I feel into Trump, all I feel is a lonely child.
Yeah.
Like desperate for connection.
Yeah.
And when that connection is withdrawn or never cultivated, we get really desperate. And it's the same thing with Elon, is this never-ending, unsatiable desire for everything comes from a very young, very wounded, and incredibly emotionally neglected.
Yeah, totally agree.
And so it's interesting. I was in one of my groups, we've been processing. The easier choice would be to be rich and to go for the money and all these, that's easier. And I'm like, actually, I don't think so. Right? I can understand that story, that narrative, is you're living a life of luxury, but at what cost?
Yeah.
Like this fixation on certain cultural, like I look at hip hop or what comes out of communities that have been so financially, opportunity wise, impoverished, is what comes out of it is creativity, life, and connection.
Yeah.
Community. Yeah. I just get chills.
And
the closest they can get to it is extracting it from them.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's soulless.
So I am not religious at all, but literally the phrase coming through as you're saying this is selling your soul to the devil, right? Yeah. And one of the things that I felt so strongly in some of the core shamanic classes and teachings that I went through is hell is actually here on earth.
Yeah.
And that doesn't take away from other religious teachings if people are watching this that believe in the underworld being hell or whatnot, but there is a way that hell manifests itself here as well.
I am not religious, but I am spiritual.
And what was really cool about that class when we all journeyed is that all of us saw that duality, every single person, and we shared about it afterwards, and it was incredible.
Yeah. So zooming out to close our episode is, what if these dualities are meant to exist at the same time, regardless of the situation? So zooming out in the big picture of things, what if all of these things are unfolding as they're supposed to? And that it's an opportunity for us to go, okay, nothing wrong with me, nothing wrong with them. What is the data telling me about the choices I want to make in my life right now? How do I want to show up for myself right now? How do I want to show up for my community right now? How do I want to show up in my life right now? And it's not about controlling them or stopping anything. It's about, what am I meant to bring in right now? How does that land?
I definitely feel very similarly, and it's something that parts of me still fight sometimes, is this sense of a universal law is just simply duality. We would never feel what's positive if we've never felt what's negative.
Absolutely.
Right? We would never know what happiness is if we've never felt sadness. So I think there is inherent truth in that. And I think that the piece that always I remember, that I remind myself from what you just said, Judy, is the sense of remembering that the way that we model how to move through this has a ripple effect.
Yes.
So can things get better over time? Can we still minimize harm within the duality? I think absolutely.
Absolutely.
I think there's plenty of room for continued healing. So I would love to see that gap between the extremes get smaller. Yeah.
And so the alchemy for today's podcast, right? So the podcast name is The Anatomy of Ancestral Alchemy. So the alchemy possibly right now is, how do you love that part of you?
Yeah.
That could consider doing that horrible thing in order to survive. How do you love that part of you with empathy, with care, and with the boundary of, no, I'm going to choose not to? Or how do I resolve or reckon with if I did choose to, right? How do you love that part anyway?
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Talk soon. Let us know how this lands.
Mhm.